Hello YouTube, this is Froogle and this is a video review of Thrustmaster's realistic combat sim ecosystem, which is a really long-winded way of saying really cool replica joysticks.
Froogle sim videos are powered by Jetline Systems.
Welcome back. This is a sponsored video from Thrustmaster. Huge shout out to Thrustmaster in Canada for sending me the Hornet Stick, the Viper Stick, and the Magnetic Base. But before we dive into the whys and wherefores of these epic controllers, let's go back in time a little bit. I've been a huge fan of Thrustmaster for many, many years. This is actually the 30th year of Thrustmaster making flight sim hardware and the 10th anniversary of the Warthog. Hence you can see there, 10th anniversary. I think I've been using Thrustmaster controls now for about 20, maybe even 25 years, having gone through the WCS, the F-16 FLCS, oh my goodness, whatever else, the Cougar, the Warthog. In fact, let me show you some of them. Look, here we have Thrustmaster T16000. That's mine. Oh, epically heavy. Thrustmaster Warthog throttle control. That's mine too. Thrustmaster joystick. That goes with the Warthog. This is actually my second one. This is the first one. I broke it. We're going to talk about this in a little while because that's the cool thing. With me being a long-time user of these products, and in particular the Warthog, I had the Warthog very, very soon after it was first released. That would be this one. I can actually give a little bit of a unique perspective on these new controls and the new base as a long-time, more than 7 or 8 or 9 years user. But anyway, back to the main review. Alright, so the new-ish realistic combat sim ecosystem consists of multiple joysticks and the base. Basically, they've taken the old Warthog and separated it into different components, and their reasoning behind that, I believe, is to make their flight sim line go kind of the same way as their racing line. If you actually go and look at Thrustmaster's racing line, you buy a separate base from wheel, from pedals, from stand, and so on and so on. It really lets you build the system that you want, rather than just going out and buying a box set of this is what we think you should have, which you can still do, by the way, but we're looking at the new stuff. Now, everything in their ecosystem revolves around this, which is their magnetic base. This, you can see me kind of straining a little bit because I'm holding it at a weird angle, weighs 4.4 pounds or 2 kilograms. It is in no way small and flimsy. It's solid metal all around, and as with their TPR, it uses Hall effect sensors. In fact, it's the HART technology, or the Hall effect accurate technology from Thrustmaster, which is basically Hall sensors. For those of you who didn't see the TPR, I'm very disappointed, you should go watch that video, but for those of you that didn't see that video, what Hall effect is basically a set of magnets that move. They upset a voltage on an underlying current. Sensors are used to measure that voltage and identify exactly what happened. The net result is it's frictionless. You don't have any moving parts like gears and cogs and resistors that you would have with a potentiometer-based setup. Also makes it immune to dust and dirt, and also gives it an epically long lifespan, which I'm going to talk about shortly with my old Warthog joystick over there. Now the base itself, as you can see, is a solid metal base. There are screw holes in each of the corners here. You can also detach the joystick base from the metal base if you want to mount this separately. Those of you that have seen my video on the Fox mounts know that that's how you would do that. You would actually unscrew, there's a number of screws on the bottom, right here. You would unscrew these, take the joystick mount off and mount it onto your cockpit or your joystick mount or whatever you have to use. Inside here is a bunch of sensors and gubbins and no less than 5 industrial strength springs, which makes this quite a heavy base to use with a joystick. Heavy not only in terms of its physical weight, but in terms of the heft needed to move the joystick itself. The base is actually compatible with more than just these two other joysticks that I'm going to talk about in a second. It's compatible with the original Warthog stick over here, obviously with the Hornet stick right here, with the Viper stick here. It's also compatible with the Cougar stick. So if you have one of the old Thrustmaster Cougars, you can detach the stick from that and use it on this cool, sexy looking new base, which is awesome. In fact, the reverse applies to the joysticks. Alright, let's talk about the two joysticks, starting with this, the Viper stick from Thrustmaster. Now, those of you that own a Warthog will already be saying, and I've seen the comments and the complaints online, the Viper stick is the same as the A10C stick. You are absolutely correct. And it's the same in the real world as well. The US Air Force did actually reuse the stick from the F-16 in the A-10 Warthog, which is why the Viper stick that's just come out is identical to the Warthog. That means, of course, if you have a Warthog, you don't need to get this. But again, going back to that ecosystem I was talking about and the way Thrustmaster are building out a lineup here where you can mix and match the controls and the bases and things to suit your own needs, this is available as an independent joystick. As with the other joystick you're about to see, the Viper Stick can also work on the Cougar base. So if you do have a Thrustmaster Cougar, the set before the Warthog, this will work with that. The Viper Stick is 100% metal in terms of its structure. Now there are plastics in terms of some of these buttons and hats, but the structure itself is all metal. It is actually quite hefty as well. It has 19 buttons in total throughout the entire joystick, plus a point of view hat, and it is a 1-to-1 scale replica licensed from the Air Force. Now that replica is not just in terms of its visual design and size and all that stuff, it actually extends to the feel of the buttons, how they are shaped, how they feel, how they click and so on. The only differences I suspect are that these typical hats here, this is the countermeasure hat for example, this is typically I think metal in the real aircraft as opposed to plastic on the Thrustmaster one. Alright, let's take a look at the individual buttons and features of the Viper Stick. First of all, on the front you have that two-stage trigger, click, click. Typically in an A10 for example that would be gun pack or stabilizer and then you're firing. So you're stabilizing the airframe then firing, but you have the two-stage trigger there. You have a missile release button top here. You have a point of view hat which is usually used in an aircraft, a modern fighter jet aircraft in particular, for trimming, which is why it actually says left wing down, right wing down and so on this button. Underneath that we have an 8-way castle hat. To the left of that we have another 8-way hat. On the side here we have a 4-way hat which is used in the A10 for countermeasures, which is also a button that can be clicked down. On the front we have a paddle switch, toe brakes usually are what get bound to that, and a pinky switch, nose wheel steering, laser on off and so on and so on. That's pretty much it. Oh, and on the front right here you have this button as well, which might be used for weapon select or whatever within whichever aircraft you're flying. The other joystick, the second joystick, is this. This is the Hornet joystick out of the F-18. This is again a 1-to-1 replica of the actual F-18 Hornet stick, this time licensed from Boeing, who make the real Hornet stick. Now this is a metal structure as well, but unlike the Viper stick, you can't feel that metal going all the way up. I think about here, you can see a seam maybe here, they split the materials into plastic. And the reason for that is, if you look at this, this is quite heavily angled forwards, just like the real stick. If this was all metal all the way up, it would tend to pull the stick forwards due to its weight. So it has a metal base down here, a lot of weight and density down the bottom part of the joystick. The top part is a lot lighter so that it doesn't tip forward. Just as with the Viper stick, the Hornet stick also has 19 buttons. It also has accurate feel, more so I think than the Viper stick. I get the two words very confused. In that, one of the complaints I have about this is that two-stage trigger on the front. You need to mean it to hit that second stage of the trigger. If you're playing a Space Combat 7, bang, 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 it can get quite tiring quite quickly. But we're talking to what this is like to use in a moment. The Hornet stick has quite a different design to the Viper stick, and in many ways I actually prefer this, which is why I just flew with this for about a year before switching back to the Viper stick. First of all, notice you have finger slots here. 1, 2, 3 finger slots and then your trigger above them. The reason for that is in the real aircraft, the Hornet stick moves, as in you pull it forwards and backwards and side to side. The F-16 stick doesn't. Well, it does, but it kind of doesn't. The F-16 stick in the real aircraft is a force-sensing stick. It identifies how much pressure you're applying to the stick and then translates that into flight controls. There is some simulated movement in that you are moving some springs and pulleys, but that's really just to give the pilot a sense of what they're doing rather than controlling the aircraft. In the F-18 stick, though, this whole stick moves, so you have a very solid hand and grip design on the front of it. As with the Viper stick, we have a two-stage trigger. It is a very solid pull to hit that second stage on the trigger. On the back here, you will notice a strange array of hats and buttons that we don't have on the Viper stick. First of all, you've got a trim hat here, which is 8 position. You have a castle hat next to it, which is also 8 position, with a click. You can actually click that. Underneath there, we have a recce mark button, which is used to do the mark function in the F-18. And next to that, I don't think this is in the real F-18, but you have a kind of a toggle that you can hold down and it springs back, you can push up and it springs back, or you can click. I actually use that a lot in a lot of sims for zoom. So I'd zoom my view by pushing up, zoom out by pulling down, and reset if I'm using track IR with that click over there. We have a missile or weapon release button on the top left here, and then down on the front of the stick, we have the paddle switch, a little bit smaller than on the F-16, and we have a pinky button. Then finally we have this multi-position hat on the side here, which again, just like the countermeasure switch on the Viper, is clickable. Both of these sticks have native support in DCS World. Both of them were developed in collaboration with EVGA Dynamics for DC as well. So if you're using the Viper stick, all the buttons and controls work in the F16 exactly as they should. Similarly, if you're using the Hornet stick, all the buttons and controls work in the Hornet just as they should. Now, in terms of my personal preference, I actually preferred using the Hornet stick for quite a long time, although it does have some quirks that you need to get used to. However, when the Viper stick arrived this week and I went back to using that for the first time in quite a very, very long time, I think over a year I've had this and not been using this, I actually found that I started to prefer the Viper stick again. The Viper stick is a lot more natural, I think, for desktop simulation than the Hornet stick. Now, the reason why is when you have this attached to a base, I'm going to plug it onto the 10th anniversary magnetic base right now, and it attaches very easy. There's a threaded sleeve at the bottom of the joystick. You simply drop it onto the magnetic base and tighten that sleeve, like so. Now, when you have the joystick attached to that base, you will notice that not only does the joystick lean forward towards me, it also has a slight tilt that way. In the real Hornet, the joystick is actually angled, I think it's about 30, maybe 35 degrees away from the pilot. So you typically don't use this with like that. If you use it like this, you'll find that your wrist is uncomfortably bent. So to use this well, you typically angle it that way to keep your wrist and your arm straight. It can be a bit of a pain, to be honest, and that's one of my complaints, I guess, about this new magnetic base. If Thrustmaster were going to update the Warthog base and release it as a standalone product, it would have been ever so nice to see them provide the ability to rotate that main joystick base at the bottom to any angle you choose. It's a minor gripe, but it is a gripe. So, having got the joystick now attached to the base, what is it like to use? Well, as I mentioned, there are 5 industrial grade coil springs in here, and they are heavy. In fact, long-time viewers of my channel know that I actually don't normally use Thrustmaster products, or didn't, for flying helicopters because that spring is so heavy. I have since changed that opinion. Once I got the Fox mounts, I'm using these for helicopters as well because I can position the joystick in a much more natural position, i.e. lower than the desk and in front of me. But anyway, these springs are heavy. You need to bear that in mind. You can easily move them, of course, with one finger, but they are not light joysticks. If you're used to using something like a Cytec X55 or X56 with the light spring where it kind of flops around, this does not do that. There is some heft to the springs in these. Because of the weight of the joystick and the base combined, you will notice as well, if I do this, it does not move around at all. You can put this on your desk and it's incredibly solid, but the downside is that this base is quite tall. So if you do have this on a desk at a normal desk height, which pretty much this table is, your arm is now actually pointing up in order to reach the main joystick. Here's a pro tip for you, don't giggle, you can actually sit on this. This is wide enough to have your thighs either side of the base, at which point the joystick is in a much more natural position for most fighter jets. Now, both the US Air Force and Boeing are pretty darn smart when it comes to designing joysticks and controls. And a little bit forward thinking, perhaps, the idea of a HOTAS is hands-on throttle and stick, that a pilot in a combat aircraft would not be looking down to try to find switches and buttons, that they would be able to find them easily with their thumbs and their fingers just based on the shape and the position. That applies equally well to those of us who use VR, where you don't have the ability to look down at your actual controls. You need to be able to find buttons by their shape and position. Both joysticks have extremely unique designs on each button. It is very, very easy to very quickly memorize where each button is, particularly over here on the Hornet stick, where you have this really quite uncomfortable castle hat over here, separate from the point of the trim hat over here. Beyond that, in use, these joysticks are superb, which is why if you go on most of the combat forums, for example, you'll see people just raving about the old Warthog. This is basically the same thing, componentized. You have, with the Hall effect sensors, 65,536 possible ranges of motion or sensor positions across the X and the Y axis. So it is incredibly accurate. It is also very, very smooth. Now, I don't know if they've updated the internals on this base. I suspect they have not, but it does feel a lot smoother than my old Warthog base. To the point, in fact, that I'm gonna remove this base from my Fox mount and put this new one on it instead. It does feel a little bit smoother. Not lighter, just smoother. Flying with these then is an absolute dream. You have amazing levels of control over whatever you're flying with these if you have the joysticks positioned correctly, and that's going back to what I just said before. Used on a desk, it is quite high, it can take some getting used to. I find it actually quite uncomfortable like that, so prior to getting the Fox mounts, I would sit on this base to make it more natural feeling. If you can get the joystick positioned where it should be and where it feels natural, you have really fine control over the pitch and the roll of the aircraft that you're flying. The only complaint I have about these then, other than that though, is that the two-stage trigger on the Hornet is heavy. Too heavy for intensive video game use. If you're flying the Hornet, it's just fine. You don't really want to be holding the guns down on a Hornet for too long. You're going to run out of ammo very quickly. But if you're looking to buy the Hornet Stick, for example, for use with a space sim like Elite Dangerous or Star Citizen, seriously, you're going to find that, I can't even do it, that gets old real quick. The trigger is realistically incredibly heavy. Not so with the Viper Stick. The trigger is just lighter and easier to use in a hurry than the really quite clicky and tricky to use one on the Hornet Stick. As I indicated at the start of this video, although this is a sponsored video, I am a long-time huge fan of Thrustmaster. I spent a lot of money on my Thrustmaster gear prior to them sending me free stuff in the past couple of weeks. So let's talk about that longevity. The Warthog Stick, or the combination of the Thrustmaster Hornet Magnetic Base and either the Viper or the Hornet Stick, is a superb combination for any kind of flying that you do, whether that's GA, big heavy airliner jets, or of course combat. But what's the longevity like? Here's my old one. This is my old one. This is the first Warthog I ever had. I've still got it and I've held onto it for posterity, but it's not really functional. There is a problem with the older bases called stiction. And what stiction is, look, you can see there, it's not a very smooth range of movement anymore off center or returning to center. And I actually had to open this up and re-grease all the bearings and everything inside to get it to work. As a caveat, it took me about 5 years, maybe even 6, to reach that point. And that's very useful to know because, let's talk about price. The base, the magnetic base, is $150. The Hornet Stick is $230. The Viper Stick is $199, or actually $200. If you hunt around on Amazon and other places, you can typically find, though, the Warthog Stick, which is basically the same thing as the Viper Stick and the magnetic base, for about $280. What I'm trying to say here is these are not cheap. The combination of a stick and a base is going to hit you for between $250 and $300. But I bring that up because it did take me 5 to 6 years of use before I reached a point where I wanted to open this up and do something about it. It wasn't really messing with my gameplay or my flying at all. It was just getting to the point where I wanted to fix it. I'm pretty inept when it comes to mechanical stuff. There's not a motorcycle, and when I took this apart, I broke it. So if you put it in those terms, $300 for a joystick that's going to last you about 5 or 6 years means it's costing you about $60 a year. That's not bad. That's a pretty good price point. That's cheaper than many low-level or mid-level joysticks from other companies, including Thrustmaster. Okay, so I've rambled on enough. Let's get to conclusions and good and bad points, wrapping them all up. In conclusion, pretty much anybody in the flight sim community will tell you if you want a high-end joystick, Thrustmaster's Warthog set is one of the best ways to go. Yeah, sure, it's pricey, but the build quality you're getting is absolutely excellent. The materials they use are incredibly high quality. Their attention to detail is, I think, unequaled. These are absolutely amazing joysticks. The downsides, obviously the cost. This combination of joystick and base is not cheap. You can get the Viper Stick and its base already attached in what they call the Warthog Stick for cheaper than the combination of the Viper Stick plus the base. That's not the point, though. If you have a Cougar, you might want to go and get the Viper Stick. If you already have a Warthog, this is a replacement Viper Stick if you break yours, and so on and so on. There is a good reason that these things are separate, but price is an issue. The next point, of course, same as with the TPR. These are big and heavy. It can be awkward to use these on a desk. You need to think about that, especially if you don't have a lot of room. This is large. This is about the size of an iPad. Let's put that into perspective. A full-size 10-inch iPad. So you do need to think about where you're going to use it and how you're going to use it, whether it's actually going to fit, especially if you do go with something like the Thrustmaster Warthog throttle set as opposed to their WCS cheaper unit. Overall, though, taking into account the cost, the build quality, the longevity, the accuracy of these joysticks, the only conclusion I can really give you Because it's up to you whether you can afford something like this or even need something like this. The only conclusion I can give you is I love them so much I bought a ton of them. I have 2 independent Warthog sets here. 3 if you include this one here. I've got separate Thrustmaster joysticks as well. I am a big fan, and there's a reason, and that would be you get great value for money with these. I think they're incredibly accurate. I think if you're really serious about your combat sims or even your general GA stuff, you really want to be looking at Thrustmaster's combination of Hornet or Viper stick with the magnetic base or the Warthog stick combination as a whole. Tell me what you think in the comment section down below. Is $300 too much to spend on a joystick? As always, my name is Froogle. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you all very soon.